Most people pick a gaming TV off a spec sheet and end up staring at a screen that's technically brilliant and completely wrong for the room it's sitting in. These 5 are the current OLEDs worth your attention, and the one at the top does something no television has managed before. The Sony Bravia A2 is the TV to look at when you care as much about how a game looks as how it responds. It uses a QD-OLED panel, which swaps the white subpixel found in most OLEDs for quantum dots, and the result is color that stays saturated even when a scene is blindingly bright. Sony's XR processor handles the heavy lifting, and it's tuned differently from the competition. Instead of chasing raw punch, it studies how the human eye actually groups objects in a frame and prioritizes depth and focus. Open-world games get a strange, almost three-dimensional quality out of it that's hard to unsee once you notice it. For PlayStation 5 owners specifically, this thing is doing extra work behind the scenes. Auto HDR tone mapping means the console reads the panel's exact capabilities during setup and calibrates itself to match, so there's no fumbling through brightness sliders and hoping for the best. Auto Genre Picture Mode flips the set into low-latency game mode the second you launch a game, then quietly switches back to a cinematic profile when you fire up a movie. It's the kind of automation you stop thinking about after week 1. And it removes the single most common reason people end up playing on a badly configured picture mode for years without realizing it. The audio deserves a mention too, because Sony does something nobody else bothers with. Acoustic Surface Audio Plus vibrates the actual screen panel to produce sound, so dialogue and effects come from the exact spot on screen where the action is happening. Footsteps behind a wall land in the right place. It's a genuinely useful competitive advantage before you've spent anything on a soundbar. Here's the honest catch, and it's the reason this sits where it does. There are only 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, and one of them doubles as the EARC connection for a soundbar. Run a PS5, an Xbox, and audio gear at the same time, and you're swapping cables. It also tops out at 4K 120 Hz rather than the 165 Hz the sets at the top of this list reach, and it only comes in 55 and 65-inch sizes. Sony has moved to a 2-year cycle, so this remains the current flagship OLED, but the gaming spec sheet is showing its age. The LGB6 is the entry point into 2026 OLED, and the surprise is how little it actually gives up where gaming is concerned. All 4 HDMI 2.1 ports are fully enabled, which is the single most useful thing a television at this level can do. There's no hunting for the one good port, no discovering after setup that the input you picked caps out at 60 Hz. Plug anything into anything and it works. Refresh rate runs 4K 120 Hz with full variable refresh support, and the feature list underneath that is unusually complete. FreeSync, G-Sync, HGIG for accurate HDR tone mapping in games, and Dolby Vision gaming, all available across every input. Input lag measures around 8.9 milliseconds at 4K 60 Hz and drops to roughly 4.9 milliseconds at 1080p 120 Hz, which is quicker than plenty of sets positioned well above it. Brightness took a real step up this generation. Around 835 nits in filmmaker mode and closer to 895 in cinema mode, which is a meaningful climb for an entry-level OLED and enough to make HDR highlights read as highlights rather than mild suggestions. Running the show is the Alpha 8 AI Gen 3 processor, a tier below the chip in the step-up models, and the gap shows mostly in upscaling lower-resolution content rather than in native 4K material. 2 honest observations. Testing showed a slight green tint compared with the model it replaces, noticeable mainly in side-by-side comparison rather than in isolation. And the 2.0 channel 20-watt speaker setup is basic, so external audio is close to mandatory rather than optional. Dolby Atmos decoding is there, but the hardware to make use of it isn't. Sizes span 48 up to 83 inches, and WebOS 26 runs the interface with the same layout as LG's pricier sets. For a first OLED, or for a second screen in a bedroom or office where a console spends most of its time, the gaming spec sheet punches considerably above where this sits in the range. The LG C6 is the model that finally closes the gap with its own flagship sibling, and it does it in the place that counts. For the first time in the C-Series, refresh rate climbs to 4K, 165 Hz across all four HDMI 2.1 ports, up from 144 Hz on the previous generation. More importantly, it runs the exact same Alpha 11 AI Gen 3 processor as LG's top-tier set. That's not a cut-down variant or a rebadged older chip. The upscaling, the motion handling, and the AI processing are identical to what you get in a set costing considerably more. Brightness climbed meaningfully too, measuring around 1,438 nits in filmmaker mode compared to roughly 1,180 on the model it replaces. Color coverage sits at 99.7% of the DCI-P3 space with an accuracy score that's essentially reference grade straight out of the box. Translation: you don't need to calibrate anything or dig through menus to get an image that's doing what the developers intended. One quirk showed up in testing, though, with faint vertical banding occasionally visible in flat gray tones, which is more likely to catch your eye in a slow panning shot than in anything fast-paced. Latency is the standout figure, around 9.2 milliseconds at 4K 60 Hz, dropping to roughly 4.2 milliseconds at 120 Hz. That second number is fast enough for fighting games and competitive shooters where a single frame decides the exchange. LG's Game Optimizer sits on top of it all, letting you switch genre presets, adjust black levels, and check refresh rate without leaving whatever you're playing. Size range runs from 42 inches up to 83, and there's a detail worth knowing. The 77 and 83-inch models use an upgraded primary RGB tandem 2.0 panel, the same technology found in LG's flagship, while the smaller sizes use the standard tandem OLED. If you're going big, you're getting a meaningful bonus. Two things to weigh. The screen is glossy rather than matte, so a bright room will produce reflections in a way it won't on the matte-screened Samsung further up this list. And the built-in 2.2-channel audio is competent but unremarkable, so budget for a soundbar. Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos are both supported, and WebOS 26 remains one of the smoothest interfaces available, though banner ads on the home screen are still an irritation. The Samsung S90H is the set that solves the problem almost every OLED owner quietly lives with, and it does it without giving up any performance to get there. Peak brightness lands around 1,650 nits, which is flagship territory from just a couple of years ago, and it holds roughly 1,300 to 1,500 nits in real content rather than only in test patterns. That matters because HDR highlights in games are usually small and fleeting. Muzzle flashes, sun breaking through trees, explosions reflected in water. This panel makes those moments land instead of flattening them out. The big change for this generation is the glare-free coating. Most OLEDs use a glossy finish that turns into a mirror the moment a lamp is on behind you, which is why so many people end up gaming with the blind shut. The matte treatment here scatters reflections instead of bouncing them back, and daytime play becomes completely viable. There is a trade-off worth knowing about. Under strong ambient light, deep blacks can drift slightly toward a grayish tone, and colors lose a touch of saturation. In a dim room, the coating gives up nothing at all, so the compromise only exists during the hours you'd otherwise be fighting glare anyway. Gaming performance is where it earns its spot. All four HDMI 2.1 ports run the full feature set, so every console and PC gets the good connection regardless of which port you grab. Refresh rate hits 165 Hz through Motion Accelerator. Variable refresh runs anywhere from 48 all the way to 165 Hz, and it carries both NVIDIA G-Sync compatibility and FreeSync Premium Pro. Input lag measures around 5 milliseconds at 120 Hz, which is fast enough that the panel stops being the limiting factor in anything you play. Samsung also spreads this across an unusually wide range of sizes, from a 42-inch model that works as a desk monitor up to 83 inches for a proper living room setup. One thing to check before ordering: the panel technology varies depending on which size you pick, with some sizes using QD-OLED and others using a tandem OLED panel. Both look excellent, but they render color slightly differently. The other omission is Dolby Vision, which Samsung still refuses to support. HDR10 Plus covers most of the same ground, though it's worth knowing if your library leans heavily on Dolby Vision content. The LG W6 is the wallpaper OLED brought back to life, and it solves a problem nobody else has properly addressed. The panel itself is 9 mm thick and mounts into a recessed bracket so it sits genuinely flat against the wall, and the only thing running to it is a power cable. Every input lives in a separate Zero Connect box that can sit up to 33 feet away, tucked inside a cabinet or an entirely different part of the room. That box transmits full bandwidth 4K video with Dolby Vision wirelessly at the panel's native 165 Hz. Not a downscaled stream, not a compressed compromise. Full rate. That matters more than it sounds for gaming specifically, because wireless video has historically meant added latency, and this doesn't work that way. Pixel response time sits at 0.1 milliseconds. NVIDIA G-Sync and AMD FreeSync Premium are both supported, and auto-low latency mode switches profiles the instant a console wakes up. There's ultra-low latency Bluetooth built in for wireless controllers and headphones too, so the whole chain from your hands to the screen stays tight, even with nothing physically plugged into the display. Picture is flagship grade with no asterisk attached. It uses the same primary RGB tandem 2.0 panel found in LG's top-wired model, paired with Brightness Booster Pro, and reaches somewhere around 3,000 nits at peak. The screen carries a reflection-free premium coating with independent Intertech certification, so bright rooms stop being the enemy they usually are for OLED. Driving all of it is the Alpha 11 AI processor Gen 3, the fastest chip LG has put in a television, handling upscaling and motion with the extra headroom that comes from a substantially quicker neural engine. Unlike the original wallpaper model from years back, speakers are built into the panel rather than living in the connection box, so it works properly straight out of the packaging. Gallery Plus turns the screen into rotating artwork from a library of more than 4,500 images when nothing is playing, and WebOS 26 runs the software side. The honest limitation is choice. It arrives in 77 and 83-inch sizes only, so this is built for a large wall and nothing smaller. Give it that wall, though. And it's the most complete gaming television available right now, and the only one that looks like it isn't a television at all. So, which one fits the room you actually play in? A matte panel built to fight daylight, or a glossy screen that goes all in on contrast in the dark? Drop your setup in the comments and let us know which way you're leaning.